Number three. What's that number three? That last one.
Number three, I was thinking about along the same lines as Dick Klein. We have some great pioneers. I was talking about basketball teams before the Bulls. Well, there was a professional basketball team called the Chicago Bruins, coached by George Halas,
Huh?
one of the early basketball leagues, I believe, the first professional basketball league. And it was founded by Joseph Carr and some of the owners in the early NFL owners. But here are the people I was thinking of. All right. The same year that George Halas became the manager and player and soon to be owner of the franchise that would become the Chicago Bears, same year that he founded or was involved in the founding of what became the NFL, 1920, was the same year that Rube Foster, a Texan who had come through Chicago and made his living and pitching and as his star baseball player in Chicago and founded the Chicago American Giants. Rube Foster was one of the founders of the Negro National League, what became the biggest Negro leagues.
Oh wow.
And Rube Foster, there's a great box score, and I'll send it to you, of a game because when George Halas went to work for the Staley Corporation or Staley Company in Decatur, he was coaching the football team, but he was also playing on the baseball team because these were company teams. And he played against Rube Foster's team that Rube Foster wasn't playing, but Rube Foster was managing. You got these like two titans of American sport, George Halas and Rube Foster, getting together on the baseball diamond. Halas homered. Rube Foster is someone who absolutely, I can't believe there isn't a biopic on him. You talk about an incredible figure, someone who was amazing as an athlete, and then as a manager, and then as a league president and league founder. Just an incredible figure in baseball history. He was eventually elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame 51 years, I think, after he died.
Right.
But Rube Foster, Chicago has a great history of, adopting people. MJ's not from here. Barack's not from here.
I will take you.
Right? Oprah's not from here. Studs Terkel's not from here. We'll take you. Right, exactly.
We'll take you.
Rube Foster, Texan. But he has a place in Chicago sports history, or really maybe the opposite. He's got a place in national sports history, but it comes through Chicago. Like MJ said, everybody comes through Chicago. Shout out to my guy Andrew Donlin. He comes through Chicago, and so Rube Foster is one of those figures who is just massive and definitely should be better known. People are like, well, why doesn't anyone talk about so and so? But I just say, well, don't say why doesn't someone talk about him, just talk about him. So Rube Foster is he's one of the titans of 20th century American sports, and he did quite a lot of his achievement was here in the city.
Yeah, that's crazy. And just even hearing that and hearing George Halas on stuff outside of football. Like when you hear George Halas, you're always talking about the Bears and the history and the legacy there. But when you start hearing these people and they're in other sports, they're doing other things, like that is,
Yeah.
and when we're talking about Foster, like you're right, like but even when we look at like biopics and stuff, it is very, I won't say it's difficult. No, I would say it's difficult. I will say it. I'm a black man. I will say that it is difficult to get
There he is, 1924.
right. It is difficult because you could go from him to Fritz Pollard
Mm.
to Josh Gibson, who with now the MLB integrating Negro League stats is by stats the greatest baseball player of all time. When you have Satchel Paige, when you have all of these people, there's not a biopic for some or all of these people, and they have very interesting, beautiful stories that should be told that is not told, but should be told. And this story right here, I can tell you right now, I've heard a number of stories growing up and loving history. I've seen a lot of these. That's a story I have never heard or never even thought existed, which is part of the reason why I want to do this pod. Which is why I want to do this episode.
So along those lines, I mean, you mentioned Fritz Pollard. I was also thinking of, Fritz Pollard. I mentioned George Mikan. I mean, obviously we're loaded with historic figures, but in terms of like a titan of someone inventing things, so Rube Foster is obviously one, and then there's another huge one. Do you know this name?
No.
Arch Ward. Arch Ward was the sports editor for the Tribune starting in 1930 until his death in 1955. And Arch Ward played one of the most interesting roles in 20th century American sports, because what Arch Ward would do is he used his position first 1925 as a sports writer, and then starting in 1930 as the editor. He would use his position to create events that he wanted to see and report on. And then he would use his position as the Tribune sports editor to then report on those events that he had created and to get them more publicity. Okay? Here's what Arch Ward started.
Oh,
shit. So I just want to make sure that I get these dates right. But Golden Gloves boxing already existed, but Arch Ward in 1928 drove the first inner city Golden Gloves battle between Chicago and New York. And then he brought Golden Gloves International and set up a bout or a series of bouts between Chicago and French boxers in 1931. And by 1936, because of all of his work in the amateur but international boxing game, Arch Ward was the coach of the U.S. Olympics boxing team in 1936, the Hitler Olympics. So he started that in 28 and 31. He didn't start Golden Gloves, but he was the first one to be like, I'm going to take this great thing and this great thing and put them together. That's what he liked. He liked to say, he basically was like, let's settle the bet. Let's settle the bar stool debate. Is it going to be this one or this one? What happens if this group plays this group, if this team plays this team? And that's what he liked to do. So in 1933, the World's Fair was coming to Chicago, and Arch Ward wanted to put together something that was really exciting for the sporting world. So he put together the first Major League Baseball All-Star Game. Arch Ward, Tribune sports editor, founded the MLB All-Star Game, because at the time, National League, American League, they only played in the World Series. So you would have all of these debates about, well, what would happen, if Babe Ruth was up against, I'm showing some of my ignorance here of who would the star National League pitcher would be. Christy Mathewson. Right. I don't think that he's a little too old, but they get into these debates. And Arch Ward used his position to get the first Major League Baseball All-Star Game, and that was what kicked off the All-Star Game. That's how it was founded. It was the first game was at Comiskey, and he used the Tribune to influence like who was going to be on the team and to like drum up support. And it was a problem because you already had the schedule laid out. You had to then get all of these players from around the country to the central location. Now it was useful that it was in Chicago, which was an actual central location, but you still had to get everyone to one place outside of the schedule that had already been written. But that was the first Major League Baseball All-Star Game, was from a Chicago Tribune sports editor, Arch Ward.
Everything dope And the world comes from Chicago.
Dilla knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. See, and
The,
okay.
the next
Good.
year,
Oh
the
shit.
next year, there was this sort of residual coming off of the World's Fair, and Archbold wanted to do another thing. Now, here was another big debate at the time. Remember, the NFL started in 1920.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it was under a different name, became the NFL in 1922, but it was started in 1920. And then you have these series of big moments. So obviously, a huge one is Red Grange. Red Grange came to the Bears in 1925, and Red Grange, like, that was the first year of the New York Football Giants. It said that Red Grange saved the Giants, that the receipts for their one game in early December saved the Giants, brought them out of the red. So the idea that Red Grange now was going to have this whole other career as a professional really changed the idea of what people thought about when they thought about football. But college football was still a much bigger deal. And if you read reporting of the day in the 20s and the 30s, players who are veterans, even into the Luckman era, are still referred to by their college. You know, like later in Sid Luckman's career, they'd be like Sid Luckman of Columbia. You know, it'd be like right now, they'd be like Patrick Mahomes of Texas Tech. It'd be
Texas
like,
Tech, yeah.
Why are you saying that? Like, he's been here a long time. So, okay. So 1933, Archbold starts the Major League Baseball All-Star Game, and then that just goes, and then that's what we have. So the next year, he's like, all right, we're going to settle this debate about who actually is better, the college kids or the pros, because that was still a debate. And what he started was, I've seen it listed under a number of different names, but he started I've seen it listed as the Chicago All-Star Classic or the College All-Star Game. I don't even know what the official name was, but you would just call it the College All-Star Game. And in August every year, the unofficial kickoff to the NFL season was the defending NFL champions against a college all-star team from the previous year. Mm. And almost all of those games were played at Soldier Field. So as I mentioned a few years ago, I did a little thing on it. We all know that Jackie Robinson famously debuted at Wrigley Field in 1947. Right. He debuted at Soldier Field 6 years earlier in 1941 as a member of the college football all-star team, playing against the defending champion Chicago Bears.
That's crazy.
Jackie Robinson ran a wheel route, and it was like the one highlight for the college kids in the second half when the Bears got going and blew them out. He blew by the defense and caught a touchdown pass against the Bears at Soldier Field. So Archbold got international Golden Globes. Well, first National Golden Globes boxing, and then International Golden Globes. He started the MLB All-Star Game, and he started the College All-Star Game, which ran into the 70s when finally they were like, all right, we can't have NFL players now in the Super Bowl era potentially getting injured against college kids. Like, that can't happen anymore. But it was a huge event. Every August was the College All-Star Classic between the NFL champs and the college kids, all the All-Stars. And that was started by Archbold, the editor, the sports editor at the Tribune, to get more things to write about. So, you know, two titans, that's my number three, Rube Foster and Archbold.
And I was low-key hoping you said something about boxing, because before Vegas, you fought in New York, you fought at Chicago Stadium.
Yeah.
Like, big boxing fights happened in Chicago. In fact, I often told people, like, if I got money, I'll do this. But I'll definitely be like, yo, there's going to be a big boxing fight here in Chicago at the United Center, because people do not know how much of a hotbed boxing was in Chicago, and it started at the Chicago Stadium.
Yeah.
So that is something that I was hoping that you would say.
And it was also at Soldier Field, because the famous long count fight of 1927 between Tunney and Dempsey, where the ref took too long after what should have been a knockout, and that was at Soldier Field. And Arch Ward was one of the sports reporters there reporting on it. So, yeah, I mean, Chicago has an amazing boxing history, but we've got an amazing sports history in every respect. And name a sport. So those are my answers.
I knew this was going to be a dope episode. I've come away from this episode learning a lot. I come away from this episode wanting to learn more about some of the things that you've discussed, which then takes me to a rabbit hole to discuss more. We didn't talk about hockey. We didn't talk about the Cubs. We didn't talk about hockey. We didn't talk about race cars. We didn't talk about NASCAR. We didn't talk about a lot of things that has happened in Chicago soccer. We low-key talked about the Chicago Sting before we had this. There's a lot. If you could put this in a bow when it comes to Chicago sports, and not just what it is like to be a Chicago sports fan or a historian, just as you, regular you, your family, everything that encompasses how you grew up into this, if you could put it into the bow, what does this mean to you? What does Chicago sports mean to you?
Chicago sports is a critical pillar of my personal identity. I view myself as an American, and I view myself as a Chicagoan. And a big portion of why, I mean, I've lived here since 2007, but I grew up in the burbs. I grew up in Evanston, and then we moved to Wilmette. So a big part of the biggest part of my Chicago identity growing up certainly was fandom and was, being a part of these teams. So it's hugely important to me. And Chicago is like an incredible history as sports fans. I mentioned that 1876 was the first year of the National League. So the first National League champion was the team that would become the Cubs. And then in 1901 was the first year of the American League, and the first champion of the American League was the White Sox. And then in 1920 was the first year of what would become the NFL, and nearly the champs were the Decatur Staleys. And then the next year, the Chicago Staleys won that league. And then, the Blackhawks started in we're celebrating their 100th anniversary right now.
Right.
And they won in their first 10 years. So we have a history of teams, forming in these major leagues and winning quickly. And then, I mentioned Wendell Phillips High School and this book, The Black Fives, and you've got Buddy Young out of Wendell Phillips and the impact that he had on college football and on the NFL and on the AAFC. Oh, I forgot Arch Ward. Good Lordy. Okay. Arch Ward, then in the 40s, the NFL owners offered him the commissionership of the NFL. And instead of taking that, he founded his own football league called the All-America Football Conference. And that is the league where we got the Cleveland Browns and the San Francisco 49ers and the first run of the Baltimore Colts. And then they folded, and then there was a new Colts team. But the Browns and the 49ers came from the AAFC, which Arch Ward, again, still while the sports editor of the Tribune, Arch Ward invented a football league. And it outdrew the NFL because there was so much enthusiasm for sports immediately after World War II. So the first year of the AFC was 1946. And they were really duking it out, and that forced a merger between the leagues, or really the NFL absorbed the AAFC. And
that's why Tittle 49ers, correct?
Little later. This is
Okay.
This is Frankie Albert 49ers.
Okay. See, I know a little bit.
Yeah. But the Cleveland Browns, that's their formation. 1946, Paul Brown, Otto Graham, Marion Motley, and I mean, if you wanna keep going, this was the tail end of when the NFL was all white.
Yeah.
And the way that black players came back into the NFL was, well, first of all, there have been activists and organizers all throughout this ban between 34 and 45. But when Arch Ward started the AAFC and he got this team out of Cleveland with Paul Brown, who was already this legendary coach in Ohio, and this was crazy. So the Cleveland Rams won the NFL championship in 1945 and immediately moved to Los Angeles. It's the only time that a team has won a championship and then relocated.
Yeah.
And they were out because their owner had already wanted to move west, and he kind of used Paul Brown as like the excuse to be like, I don't know, this guy's going to come in and like mop the floor with us because he has this Ohio history. So they move to Los Angeles and they want to use the LA Coliseum. And now now activists and organizers in California, now they've got him. And they say, if you want to use the LA Coliseum, which is a taxpayer-funded stadium, then you need to integrate. And that is why the NFL, the new LA Rams, brought in Kenny Washington and Woody Strode, who, of course, were teammates at UCLA with Jackie Robinson, all in the same backfield. So, that, not to like sit here and give credit to Arch Ward, because that's a crummy thing to do, but just looking at like the sequence of events, Arch Ward has this outsized role in sports in the 20th century, in baseball, in football, and in boxing, and Rube Foster as well. So both of those guys, just these incredible figures. Everything dope comes from Chicago. I mean, these incredible figures who changed the world, because American sport influenced the entire world, influenced the culture, influenced economics, influenced everything. And so much of it came from Chicago. And I think it started because Chicago fans love sports. And we had these long histories of teams built up from the late 19th century, of teams building up and having passion and supporting these clubs and supporting these teams. The oldest NFL team, the only NFL team that stretches its history back to the 19th century, is the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah.
And they were called, they were the Chicago Cardinals, but before that they were the Racine Cardinals. And the original minutes of the first meeting, September 17th, 1920, the first meeting of what became the NFL, and listed out where all the teams were from, and it said Racine, Wisconsin, because they didn't realize that the Racine Cardinals were because of Racine Avenue, not because of Racine, Wisconsin. So the oldest NFL team, even though we look at you mentioned St. Louis and football, now, bring this back around, the Arizona Cardinals, the oldest team in the NFL, they go back to the 19th century, and that's in Chicago.
And that's crazy that if you were to ask somebody that right now, they would not say the Arizona Cardinals. They would not say that at all. But
Certainly not.
That's how much their history go back to.